The Boy Who Lost His Face by Louis Sachar, Chapter 28. He headed in no particular direction as he walked away from Mrs. Bayfield's house. He couldn't go back to school, and it was too early to go home. He thought about running away. He could hitchhike to San Francisco, then stow away on a boat to China. By the time anyone found him, it would be too late. They'd have to give him a job mopping the deck. Or was it called swabbing the deck? Of course he knew he would never do that. Besides, he couldn't run away from the curse. It would follow him wherever he went, dumping lemonade on his head and pulling down his pants. Somehow, he'd have to get the cane from Roger Delbrook. Maybe he could buy it from him. He had more than $500 in the bank. He figured he could probably get the cane for no more than $50. He imagined their conversation. "Hey, Roger, I have a deal for you." Or, "Hey, Roger, I got a deal for you," he'd say. "What do you want, Ballinger?" asked Roger. "You know that cane you took from old Bayfield? I'll give you $10 for it." "Go to hell, Ballinger." "I'm not kidding. I'll give you $10 for it. Make it 15. "I wouldn't give you that cane for $100, asshole." "All right, $20. That's my final offer. You really want it? You can have it for 50, 25, 40, 30, 35. Okay, 35. He'd give Roger the money, and Roger would give him the cane. "Here's the cane. Take it and stick it up your ass." "Thanks." It seemed like a good plan. It was certainly worth $35 to get rid of the curse. Or he could steal it. He had thought he was walking in no particular direction, but looking up, he discovered he was at the corner of Commonwealth Circle. Roger lived at the end of the street. David had never been inside Roger's house, but he knew where he lived. His house was at the cul-de-sac at the end of the block. Both of Roger's parents probably worked, so there was probably no one home right now. The cane was probably just stuck inside Roger's closet. He walked down the street. It was amazingly quiet. There might not have been anyone home in any of the houses. With his hands in his pockets, he walked around the circle of the cul-de-sac. He just wanted to get a better look at Roger's house. He had nothing better to do. He had no intention of breaking in. But if he was going to break in, how would he do it? First, he'd have to ring the doorbell to make sure nobody was home. And then, if there was nobody home, at the side of the house, there was a fence with a gate leading to the backyard. He could just walk through the gate, or if it was locked, hop the fence. Once in the backyard, no one would be able to see him from the street. He would just have to find an open window, or he could break a window. He smiled. Roger broke Mrs. Bayfield's window. It would only be fair. Roger stole Mrs. Bayfield's cane. Now he could break Roger's window and steal back the cane. Might as well trample some flowers while he was at it. Of course, he wasn't really going to do that. He was just killing time until he could go home. He walked toward the Delbrooks' front door just to see if anybody was home. He tried to think of what he'd say if somebody answered. He could say he was selling magazines. No, that was too complicated. If he heard someone coming, he'd just run away. No harm, no foul. He rang the doorbell. No one answered the door. Just to make certain, he rang the bell again. He also knocked loudly on the door with the side of his fist. Nobody was home. He stepped backwards off the stoop away from the door and looked around. The street was still empty. He casually headed toward the side of the house. There was a small chain sticking through a hole in the tall wooden gate. He tugged at the chain. It was locked. He stepped back. The fence was about 7 feet tall. He took a few more steps backward and untied the drawstring on his pants and retied it tight. He ran at the fence and jumped. He grabbed the top of the gate with his hands as his feet kicked against the side, trying to get some sort of traction. He managed to get his right elbow up, then swung his right leg over. "Hey, what are you doing?" He looked back to see a little kid running toward him. It was Roger's brother, Glenn. David was half on, half off the top of the gate. "My ball went over the fence," he said. He hopped back down on the ground. "I rang the doorbell, but nobody was home." "I know who you are," said Glenn. "You're Ricky's brother." "I was just getting my ball," said David. He didn't know why he was even bothering to explain himself to a fifth grader. "Forget it." He started to walk away. "Stooge." He stopped and turned around. "What'd you call me?" "Stooge," said Glenn scornfully. "You're the big stooge and Ricky is the little stooge. That's what everyone calls him." David took a step toward him. "You know what Ricky said?" asked Glenn. "He said the Three Stooges were highly respected in their field." He laughed. "He said it was a compliment to be called a stooge." "I'm warning you," said David as he took another step toward Glenn. Glenn raised his fist. "You want to fight?" he asked. "I'll fight you. I could beat you up just like I beat up Ricky." David stopped. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't very well fight a little kid. "What are you doing home from school?" he demanded. "Half day," said Glenn with his fists in the air. "Teachers' meeting." David glared at him, then sighed disgustedly, trying to show contempt. What's the matter? Asked Glenn. You afraid to fight a fifth grader? I got better things to do than mess with a little kid like you, said David, turning away. Stooge, shouted Glenn. Wait till I tell my brother. Wait till I tell my brother you were afraid to fight a fifth grader. And I bet there's no ball back there either. Wait till I tell my brother you were... David spun around. You can tell your brother. You can tell your brother that I think he's a sack of dog shit. Tell him that. Tell your pissant brother that I'll be back here tomorrow if he wants to do anything about it. Tell him I want the snakehead cane too. You got all that, or do you want me to write it down for you? Tell him David Ballinger will be back tomorrow at noon to get the snakehead cane and that he better be here. He turned and strode away, leaving Glenn Delbrook with his mouth hanging open. And that is the end of chapter 28.